Condition to cancer. Hello, invisible friends. I am Logo, and I want to share with you the logical steps we must take if we have a major disease and how to face it while continuing to attend to the treatments and recommendations of your doctors. Pavlovian conditioning was postulated by the Russian physiologist Ivan Pavlov. A stimulus that initially did not generate a response is linked to another stimulus that did. As a result, the first stimulus begins to generate the same response. For example, when a dog associates the sound of a bell with food and saliva when it hears the bell. In this type of conditioning, two stimuli are associated, one that initially did not generate a response and the other that did. If a habit is formed in response to a specific stimulus, it could be considered an example of classical conditioning. For example, if you always brush your teeth after eating, your mind associates food with the need to brush. Operant conditioning. It implies the existence of a reinforcing stimulus that follows a previous response. It is not a matter of associating stimuli, but of learning new behaviors. For example, if we reward a dog with a treat every time it obeys a command, we are applying operant conditioning. Here, new behaviors are learned based on the consequences that follow an action. If a habit is maintained or changed due to rewards or punishments, it is also related to operant conditioning. For example, if you exercise regularly because you feel good afterwards, that's a type of operant conditioning. In short, either through classical associations or habits can be linked to conditioning, the consequences that follow our actions. In terms of habits and customs, habits are repetitive actions performed unconsciously by an individual. They can be healthy, like exercising, or unhealthy, like smoking. Customs, on the other hand, are social practices transmitted from generation to generation. They are ingrained in the culture and can change over time. For example, customs related to celebrations, religious rituals, or eating habits. In short, habits are individual and automatic, while customs are social and cultural. Both influence our daily lives and the tradition of a community. When an athlete practices their techniques over and over again, they are engaging both habits and conditioning. The constant repetition of an action creates habits. In the case of the athlete, by practicing techniques on a regular basis, their mind and body get used to that routine. For example, a swimmer who always gets up early to train develops the habit of doing it automatically. In the same way, our cells have that capacity. Despite wanting to remain healthy when seeking to adapt to situations out of the ordinary, we can lead them to collapse if we take bad habits. A human cell has a three-dimensional volume, and to be managed efficiently, it needs to have the capacity for action and reaction. Therefore, it requires certain conditions even in physical space. A tidy room with everything arranged in a natural logical order is not the same as a room of a compulsive hoarder. The compulsive hoarder prevents one from moving efficiently in spaces, hindering and contaminating every process with obstacles around it. The same goes for a cell saturated with substances, whether fats, sugars, or unwanted substances that would be the disruptors. In the case of cancer, there can be many types of mutation and therefore types of tumors, but as Dr. Thomas Siegfried mentions, they all have something in common. It refers to the origin of the fuel fermentation process in the cell. This fuel is glucose and glutamine due to their adaptive capacity for fermentation in an oxygen-free environment. Remember that fermentation is the way to generate energy without oxygen. Before continuing with the subject, we must know what reserves we store to later dispose of in our body. Human beings do not have a fuel tank where we store parts to be used later as a spare parts depot. We can only store the sources of our energy, and that is done in the form of fat and glucose. Our glucose reserve in the cell is limited in terms of space and efficiency, which is why a 100-meter runner is exhausted after doing his race. This is how we store fat, since it has a potential 7 times greater than glucose, that is, occupying the same space, it has a potential 7 times greater and is stable to be stored for a long period without degrading. This with respect to the volume of glucose to generate that same energy. That is without counting the fermentation capacity of glucose versus the stability of fat, as it is not very reactive. This fat will be slowly transformed into glucose to restore our minimum levels in our body through the liver. Let's review our conditioning. It is a process by which we adapt to a recurring condition. Through repetition and the association of stimuli, our mind and behavior adjust to specific situations. In short, conditioning helps us adapt and learn based on our experiences. When we gain more weight, something is for sure: we must have systemic inflammation in our cells, and this does not happen spontaneously. It is just a reflection of what we eat and how much we accumulate. Let's better understand the mechanics of cancer. Our motor vehicles need a combustion chamber to work. This is the cylinder where the explosion occurs when the spark plug ignites the mixture. This is a composition of gasoline and air in an exact proportion to burn properly and leave no residue. In the same way, we can say that we work. In the cell, there is an organelle called mitochondria, which acts as a combustion chamber, and its spark plug is biochemical through phosphorus reacting and releasing energy. To achieve this reaction, a precise amount of glucose and oxygen is required. Remember that ATP is formed internally, which is our true fuel. Let's not forget all this happens in a plasma or aqueous environment. Analyzing well, fat does not get along well with water, which makes it difficult for fluid to pass through cell membranes. This happens when we have very high levels of body fat. Generally, excess carbohydrates and sugars keep the system under stress as we maintain what is called systemic inflammation. This is due, among other causes, to insulin. This hormone to lower blood sugar levels deposits that sugar inside the cells just like fats. So imagine our cells as balloons inflated more than normal with these substances. Our oxygen is transported by an aqueous medium, that is, blood, and fat does not get along well with water. Therefore, the ability to transport oxygen to the cells is impaired. Interesting. How do we make a proper mixture of our fuel if not enough oxygen reaches the mitochondria? On the other hand, what happens if we have more fuel in the mixture than we should? In combustion vehicles, it is called choking and is due to the excess fuel that prevents the spark plug from burning the gasoline, and when it gets wet, it prevents the spark from activating with enough power to ignite the mixture. Something similar happens in the mitochondria of the cell. Somehow, the onset of fermentation of glucose and glutamine, which are the fuels of cancer, and the formation of tumors due to fermentation or oxygen-free energy begins from the drowning of the mitochondria, just like a fuel vehicle. We must also understand that since gasoline vehicles do not work if we put inadequate fuel. If we put diesel, for example, the system will collapse, causing catastrophic damage. In the same way, many disruptive substances will damage our organic energy process, such as fructose and other synthetic sugars derived from corn alcohols, such as maltitol, etc. In addition, there are other types of disruptors that generate or have substances that block processes or damage mitochondria, such as asbestos, radiation, some poisonous viruses, heavy metals, among others. But this cause of cancer is reduced to a ridiculous 3 to 5% of all reported cases. More than 95% of cases are due to metabolic degeneration. That is, when we eat substances that are not really food, and rather than stimulating our palate and taking away our hunger, they are slowly poisoning us day by day, drop by drop. We can choose two paths. Positive adaptation refers to adjusting beneficially to a situation or environment, while negative adaptation can involve changes that are not beneficial or even harmful. However, a negative adaptation cannot necessarily be called a vice. It may involve learning new skills, building resilience, or finding creative solutions. Therefore, we must learn to understand what really feeds us and choose the best in the long term, possibly due to some circumstances such as economic or geographical influence us when choosing what to eat, when and how to exercise, rest, etc. But if we see it on a scale, we can also choose the most positive without being purists of food perfection. Stay away from vices and vicious people. This refers to attitudes that are not beneficial or that can negatively affect our quality of life. It can include unhealthy habits or inappropriate responses to stressful situations. A vice is a compulsive and harmful behavior that affects a person's physical, mental, or social health. Not all cases of negative adaptation are vices. Some may simply be inefficient or unhealthy responses. What can we do to improve our habits? To alter the variables in our energy production and improve health, we must eliminate carbohydrates from our diet if we are sick or moderate their consumption to stay healthy. Since we will lower our fat and inflammation, exercising and staying hydrated. This stimulates our breathing, making it deeper and transporting oxygen more efficiently than a totally sedentary person. Eat properly and in a varied way. This was mentioned in previous chapters 1 and 2. Do not consume toxic substances, see chapter 4. In the same way, I think it is convenient to have seen all our chapters to better understand the whole panorama. In short, while positive adaptation improves our situation, negative adaptation can vary in its impact. Not all cases of negative adjustment are vices, but some can lead to harmful behaviors. Friends, don't forget that what we do today will have an impact on our tomorrow. I'm telling you about my experiences. Ask your trusted doctor about it. It is your decision to take the steps to move forward. Do not let yourselves be indulging by the learned despair within or by other people who, like birds of ill omen, preach defeatism. If you like the video and want to help spread this information, remember to click on the bell and subscribe to receive more information like this. Remember that step by step we can improve. The worst thing is to do nothing. Invisible friends, we see ourselves in the mirror.